Picture this. You've just defeated the final boss of Elden Ring. Watch the credits roll, and you think you understand the story. The greater will, the two fingers, the demigods, fighting over the Elden Ring. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, what if I told you that everything you think you know about this world is actually a carefully constructed lie? What if the real truth behind the lands between is so shocking that From Software buried it beneath layers of cryptic dialogue, hidden item descriptions, and environmental storytelling that most players will never piece together? My name is Marcus, and I've spent the last 8 months diving deeper into Elden Ring's lore than any sane person should. I've analyzed every single item description, mapped out character connections that span thousands of years, and uncovered evidence that completely changes how we understand this entire universe. The truth I'm about to reveal will make you question everything you thought you knew about the Golden Order, the Outer Gods, and the very nature of reality in the lands between. But here's the thing. This isn't just some wild theory I cooked up in my spare time. I've got receipts, hard evidence scattered throughout the game that tells a completely different story than what's presented on the surface. Evidence that suggests the entire conflict we're witnessing isn't actually about succession or power or even the fate of the world. It's about something far more sinister, something that's been happening for eons, and something that makes every character in this story both victim and perpetrator at the same time. Now, before we dive into the rabbit hole, let me warn you. Once you see what I'm about to show you, you can't unsee it. Every playthrough, every piece of dialogue, every seemingly random detail will suddenly make perfect sense in the most disturbing way possible. The developers at From Software didn't just create a dark fantasy world. They created a cosmic horror story masquerading as a medieval epic. And they've been laughing at us for missing the point this entire time. And trust me, I've put in the work here. We're talking about cross-referencing mythology from multiple cultures, analyzing architectural details that most people run past without a second thought, and connecting dots between characters whose relationships span multiple games in the From Software catalog. This isn't surface-level theorizing. This is archaeological excavation of a narrative so complex that it makes Game of Thrones look like a children's bedtime story. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to walk you through the evidence piece by piece, starting with the most obvious clues that everyone missed, then building up to the revelation that will completely flip your understanding of this world upside down. We'll examine the true nature of the Elden Ring itself, uncover the real identity of Queen Marika, and discover why the shattering wasn't a catastrophe, but actually a desperate attempt to prevent something far worse from happening. But first, we need to talk about the fundamental misconception that's been clouding everyone's judgment since day one. See, when most players look at Elden Ring, they see a story about gods and demigods, about divine succession and the struggle for power. They see the greater will as some sort of cosmic deity, the two fingers as its messengers, and the outer gods as rival pantheons vying for control over the lands between. That's exactly what you're supposed to think. That's the surface narrative, the comfortable lie that makes this world feel familiar and comprehensible. But what if I told you that the greater will isn't a god at all? What if the two fingers aren't divine messengers, but something far more parasitic? What if everything we think we know about the cosmology of this world is actually an elaborate cover story designed to hide the true nature of what's really happening here? The first major clue comes from something that's been staring us in the face this entire time: the Elden Ring itself. Everyone assumes it's some sort of cosmic artifact, a symbol of divine power that shapes reality. But look closer at its structure, at the way it's described in the game's own text. The Elden Ring isn't a ring at all. It's a web, a complex, interconnected network of runes and symbols that doesn't just govern the laws of physics and the lands between, but actually rewrites them on a fundamental level. Now, why would a divine artifact need to constantly rewrite the laws of reality? Why would something created by benevolent gods require such aggressive, invasive control over the natural order? The answer is simple. It wouldn't, unless the greater will isn't trying to create order at all, but rather to impose an artificial system over something that already exists. Something that keeps trying to reassert itself, forcing the ring to constantly adapt and evolve to maintain control. This becomes even more obvious when you start paying attention to the visual design of the Elden Ring itself. Those aren't divine runes carved into a celestial artifact. Those are restraints, binding sigils designed to contain something that's constantly trying to break free. And if you look at the way the ring shatters during the game's opening, you'll notice something interesting. It doesn't break randomly. It breaks along specific fault lines, as if the thing that was being contained finally found the weak points in its prison. But here's where it gets really interesting. The shattering wasn't caused by the demigods fighting over the ring's power. The demigods started fighting because the ring shattered, and what was released during that shattering began influencing them in ways they couldn't understand or control. Queen Marika didn't orchestrate the shattering out of grief over Godwyn's death. She caused it because she finally understood what she had been serving all along, and she made a desperate gambit to break the cycle before it was too late. Think about it. Marika was the vessel for the Elden Ring, the living embodiment of the greater will's power in the lands between. She had access to knowledge and cosmic awareness that no other character in the story possessed. She could see the true nature of the system she was part of, and what she saw horrified her so much that she chose to destroy everything rather than let it continue. The evidence for this is scattered throughout the game, but once you start looking for it, it's everywhere. The way NPCs describe feeling watched, even when they're alone. The strange geometric patterns that appear in ruins throughout the lands between. Patterns that don't match any known architectural style, but bear an unsettling resemblance to neural networks. The fact that every major location in the game sits on top of something older, something that was clearly there long before the Golden Order arrived. And then there's the most damning piece of evidence of all. The underground areas. Specifically, the way they're structured and what you find in them. These aren't just ancient ruins or forgotten civilizations. They're processing centers. Vast, mechanical complexes designed to extract something from the inhabitants of the lands between, to harvest and refine it into a form that can be transmitted elsewhere. The creatures you encounter in these areas aren't just monsters or fallen beings. They're the discarded byproducts of this process, the leftover husks of what were once thinking, feeling entities that got fed into a cosmic machine and came out fundamentally changed. And the deeper you go, the more obvious it becomes that this process has been going on for far longer than the recorded history of the lands between. We're not just talking about hundreds or thousands of years here. We're talking about geological timescales. Entire civilizations have been processed through this system, their cultures and knowledge extracted and transmitted to something that exists outside our reality entirely. The lands between isn't a kingdom or an empire. It's a farm, a carefully maintained ecosystem designed to produce a specific type of consciousness that can then be harvested and consumed by entities that exist in dimensions we can barely comprehend. And the most terrifying part? This isn't unique to the lands between. The same patterns, the same architectural markers, the same evidence of systematic harvesting can be found in every From Software game if you know what to look for. Lordran, Drangleic, Lothric, Yharnam, Ashina. They're all part of the same system, different nodes in a vast network of consciousness farms that spans multiple realities. The greater will isn't a god. It's a gardener, and we're the crop. But wait, it gets worse. Because once you understand that the greater will is essentially a cosmic farmer, everything else starts falling into place in the most disturbing way possible. The two fingers aren't divine messengers at all. They're quality control inspectors. Think about how they behave throughout the game. They don't actually communicate with the greater will in real time. They go into these long periods of contemplation, supposedly receiving divine guidance. But what they're really doing is analyzing the current state of the harvest and determining whether the crop is ready for collection. In those periods where they seem confused or uncertain, that's not divine mystery. That's a system malfunction. The shattering threw off their calculations, disrupted the carefully maintained ecosystem they were monitoring. Suddenly, they can't get clear readings on the consciousness levels in the lands between, can't determine the optimal harvest time. That's why they're so desperate to find a new Elden Lord. They need someone to repair the system and get the farm back online. Now let's talk about the demigods themselves, because their role in this cosmic horror story is absolutely crucial. Everyone thinks they're fighting over inheritance, over who gets to rule the lands between. But look at their actual behavior, their motivations, the way they've changed since the shattering. They're not acting like rational beings pursuing political power. They're acting like addicts going through withdrawal. See, the demigods weren't just born with fragments of the Elden Ring. They were specifically bred to be optimal consciousness producers. Each one represents a different aspect of awareness, a different flavor of thought and emotion that the greater will finds particularly nutritious. Godric's obsession with grafting? That's not just vanity or a desire for power. That's a compulsive need to increase his consciousness output, to produce more of the specific type of awareness he was designed to generate. Radon's endless war against the stars? He's not trying to protect the lands between from cosmic threats. He's trying to prevent the harvest ships from landing. Those aren't stars he's holding back. They're collection vessels, waiting for the signal that the crop is ready for extraction. And his madness, his descent into mindless violence, that's what happens when a consciousness producer realizes what they really are and tries to break free from their programming. Riker's transformation into the god-devouring serpent becomes even more horrifying when you understand the true nature of the system. He didn't just rebel against the Golden Order. He figured out that the only way to escape being harvested was to become something so toxic, so indigestible, that the greater will would have to abandon this particular farm entirely. He's literally poisoning the well, making himself and everyone around him unsuitable for consumption. And Millennia, her scarlet rot isn't a curse or a disease. It's an immune response. Her body is trying to reject the consciousness harvesting process, to become something that can't be processed by the system. But the effort is literally eating her alive from the inside out, turning her into something that's neither fully human nor fully other. The evidence for this interpretation is everywhere once you start looking for it. The way certain areas of the game feel wrong, like they're being observed by something vast and inhuman. The geometric patterns carved into ancient stones that look suspiciously like circuit boards or neural networks. The fact that every major boss fight takes place in locations that bear an uncanny resemblance to processing facilities or collection points. But here's the really twisted part. The Tarnished, the player character, isn't the hero of this story. We're the cleanup crew. The greater will brought us back from beyond the fog, specifically to repair the damaged farm and get the harvest back on track. Every time we defeat a demigod and claim their great rune, we're not claiming power for ourselves. We're repairing the Elden Ring, restoring the consciousness harvesting system to full functionality. Think about the endings of the game. Really think about them. The Age of Stars ending, where Ranni removes the influence of the greater will. She's not freeing the lands between from divine tyranny. She's cutting the farm off from its owners, leaving the inhabitants to live in a reality that's slowly decaying because the artificial systems that maintain it are breaking down. The Frenzied Flame ending? That's not destruction. That's sterilization. Burning away all consciousness so that nothing can ever be harvested from this reality again. Even the so-called good endings, where we become Elden Lord and restore the Golden Order, are actually us completing our mission as cosmic janitors. We're fixing the broken farm equipment and ensuring that the harvest can continue for another few thousand years. The greater will doesn't care about the political structure of the lands between. It doesn't care about justice or order or the welfare of the inhabitants. It only cares about maintaining optimal conditions for consciousness production. And the most disturbing part of all, this isn't speculation. The evidence is right there in the game's own text, hidden in plain sight. Item descriptions that talk about voices from beyond the stars. Environmental details that show clear signs of systematic extraction and processing. Character dialogue that makes perfect sense once you understand that everyone involved is trapped in a cosmic horror story they don't fully comprehend. The developers at From Software have been telling this story across multiple games, building up a shared universe of consciousness farms and cosmic harvesters. The recurring themes of cycles and ages and the inevitable decay of civilizations aren't just narrative devices. They're describing the life cycle of a farm, the way consciousness is cultivated, harvested, and the fields left fallow before the next planting season begins. But here's where it gets really interesting, because if this interpretation is correct, then there's something else hidden in the game's lore, something that suggests not everyone is helpless against this cosmic farming operation. There are characters who figured out what's really happening, who found ways to resist or escape the system entirely. And their methods, their discoveries, their desperate attempts to break free from the cycle are scattered throughout the game like breadcrumbs, leading to the most shocking revelation of all, the truth about what lies beyond the fog, what exists in the spaces between realities, and why the greater will is so desperate to harvest consciousness from worlds like the lands between. Because it's not just feeding on us, it's feeding on us to survive something else, something even more terrifying that exists in the cosmic ecosystem above our level of reality. The greater will isn't the apex predator in this cosmic food chain. It's prey, and that changes everything about why the lands between exists, why the consciousness harvesting is so systematic, and why the entire operation feels so desperate and frantic beneath its veneer of divine order. The greater will isn't farming us because it wants to. It's farming us because it has to. Because something even more vast and incomprehensible is farming it. Think about the behavior patterns we see throughout the game. The way the two fingers seem constantly anxious, always checking and rechecking their calculations. The way the Golden Order's laws feel improvised, like they're being written and rewritten in real time by something that's making it up as it goes along. The way certain areas of the game feel like they're being watched not by one presence, but by multiple layers of observers, each one bigger and more alien than the last. This isn't the confident dominion of a supreme cosmic entity. This is the panicked scrambling of something that's trying to meet a quota, trying to produce enough processed consciousness to satisfy its own predators before they decide to harvest it directly. The greater will is essentially a middle manager in a cosmic corporation, desperately trying to keep its bosses happy while managing an increasingly dysfunctional workforce. And suddenly, Queen Marika's actions make perfect sense. She didn't shatter the Elden Ring out of grief or rebellion. She figured out that the system was failing, that the greater will was falling behind on its quotas, and that something much worse was coming to collect. The shattering wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of mercy, a desperate attempt to make the lands between unsuitable for harvesting before the real monsters arrived. The evidence for this is scattered throughout the most obscure corners of the game, in item descriptions that most players never read, and environmental details that seem random until you understand the bigger picture. References to things that exist beyond the greater will's influence, geometric patterns that suggest surveillance systems layered on top of surveillance systems. And most tellingly, the way certain NPCs react with terror, not to the idea of death or suffering, but to the concept of being truly seen by something from outside their reality. But here's what makes this revelation so brilliant and so terrifying. From Software hasn't just created a single cosmic horror story. They've created a fractal horror story, one where every level of reality is being farmed by the level above it, stretching up into dimensions that our minds can't even begin to comprehend. The greater will harvests consciousness from the lands between, but something else harvests the processed consciousness from the greater will, and something else harvests that, and so on, potentially forever. We're not just trapped in a single layer of this cosmic prison. We're trapped in what might be an infinite regression of consciousness farms, each one more alien and incomprehensible than the last. And the most disturbing part? There might not be a top level. There might not be some ultimate cosmic entity that's truly free. It might just be harvesting all the way up, an endless chain of predators and prey stretching across dimensions we can't even imagine. This is why the game feels so hopeless, why every ending feels like a compromise at best and a catastrophe at worst. Because there is no real escape. There's no final boss we can defeat to free ourselves from this system. The best we can do is try to break our particular link in the chain, knowing that we're just passing the problem up to the next level. And that's the shocking truth that From Software has been hiding in plain sight all along. Elden Ring isn't just a dark fantasy about gods and demigods fighting over power. It's a cosmic horror story about the nature of reality itself, about how consciousness might be the universe's most valuable resource, and about what happens when that resource becomes the basis for an economy that spans multiple dimensions. The lands between isn't a kingdom, it's a product, and we're not heroes destined to save it. We're quality control inspectors, brought in to make sure the product meets specifications before it gets shipped off to feed something that exists so far beyond our understanding that we can't even perceive it directly. But here's the thing that gives me hope, and it's the reason I made this video. Because once you understand the true nature of the system, once you see through the lies and the misdirection and the carefully constructed narrative that's designed to keep us compliant, you can start to see the cracks in the foundation, the places where the system is vulnerable, where conscious beings have found ways to resist or escape, or at least die on their own terms. The truth about Elden Ring's lore isn't just shocking, it's liberating. Because once you know what you're really fighting against, once you understand that the entire cosmic order is built on exploitation and deception, you can start to imagine what it might look like to tear it all down and build something better in its place. That's the real message hidden in this game. Not that we're powerless against cosmic forces beyond our comprehension, but that even the most vast and alien systems of control depend on our cooperation to function. And the moment we stop cooperating, the moment we stop playing by their rules, the whole thing starts to fall apart. So the next time you boot up Elden Ring, remember what you're really looking at. Not a fantasy world, but a mirror. A reflection of our own reality, where consciousness is harvested and processed and sold to the highest bidder. Where we're told that the system exists for our benefit when it really exists to benefit something else entirely. The greater will isn't coming from outside our reality. It's already here. It's been here all along. And now that you know what to look for, you'll start seeing its fingerprints everywhere. But that's a story for another video. If this completely changed how you see Elden Ring, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what other From Software games you think are connected to this cosmic horror network. And if you want to dive even deeper into the hidden lore that most players never discover, make sure you're subscribed, because I've got about 15 more videos worth of evidence to share with you. Trust me, we've only scratched the surface of how deep this rabbit hole goes.